I always have to say sometimes it takes a while to get going. Sweet, there we go. So awesome, great to have you on again. This is cool because, like I had just mentioned, our original talk was about a week before you had put up the website, and you were saying that so much has changed, but also not anything at all. And it was interesting because as I was kind of going back and scrubbing through some of our points on our previous talk, um, there seemed like there were some things that are still relevant now, 2 years ago, but also some things that have kind of shifted around the sustainability landscape. So I'm interested in like how that's all played out with what you've done, and also all the things that you've learned having, now been 2 years into everything that you're trying to do.
Awesome. Yeah, I look forward to diving into all of it.
Awesome.
Where should we begin?
So I guess for newer listeners, potentially, maybe just introducing yourself and saying a little bit about what you do.
Great. Yeah, so Nicole Bassett, I'm one of the co-founders of the Renewal Workshop. And the Renewal Workshop is the leading provider for circular solutions for apparel and textile brands. And what that means is essentially we are here to provide solutions for brands who want to become circular business models. And what we found is that brands can start with the products that they've already made and making sure that we extend the life of those products and get them back into use again. Circular also means looking at how products are made originally. And so we work with our brand partners and give them data back based on what we learn through our process. And then we also enable recycling of textiles. So we have things that are too damaged, cannot get resold again. And so we want to find solutions for that product. So we work with a network of various recyclers to get materials into the right hands in the right way so that it actually could be turned into a new material. So that's us.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think the crazy part about that is you can't really put that into like a single sentence. I feel like some of the people that I talk to, they talk about trying to hone in on their, quote unquote elevator pitch, but there's so much with this product side of things as it relates to apparel that it's almost impossible, at least just from my understanding, to even try and put that into one sentence.
Yeah, it's true. I think and why that's true is because this hasn't been done before. So we're very used to how things are made in this linear way. And I shouldn't say we are used to it. I think people are becoming much more aware that my stuff comes from somewhere and someone made it. And now we're starting to open our eyes on what happens to stuff when I'm done with it. Where does it go next? And for the longest time, we've had some decent solutions available to us because there were good charity systems or we could repair things. But that's changing. That marketplace has changed a lot over the last, I would say, 10, 25 years. And the solutions just aren't available. We have too much stuff. And so the options become not as desirable as they once were, sending too many things to landfill or incineration. So now the question is really about like, okay, how do I learn and figure out this post-consumer supply chain? And that's what we're doing.
Totally. So what was the first step into getting the business, actually running itself, and how did that end up? Because like I had mentioned, the last time we had talked was you were just about a week prior to launching the website. What were the first couple steps involved with, actually getting everything off the ground?
Yeah, so we had done our Indiegogo campaign. We had done the pre-orders on product and got everything ready. And yeah, you're right. We launched the website in February of 2017. So that website launch was a big deal because what it really was is that we were now able to sell renewed product to consumers with and on behalf of our brand partners. So our early partners, prAna and Toad & Co., Mountain Khakis, now all were able to say to their customers, hey, if you want to buy renewed of our product, here's a place where you can go and get that out into the marketplace. And everyone was super excited. We had a whole bunch of press that we got from that. Our brand partners did videos, they did their own stories and articles and things like that. And that was really exciting to see that launch. And And what that enabled us to do is show the world that there was a marketplace for Renewed, that brands really got to engage with their customers and get a lot of brand value out of that. And that led us to launching a website completely dedicated to and for the North Face, and that launched in June of 2018, where you can go to thenorthfacerenewed.com and get Renewed North Face.
Awesome. And you're wearing it right now too.
I am. And I have like a Toad & Co shirt on and prAna pants. I wear our partners a lot.
It's the only way to be. But yeah, so what did that look like then, trying to get all of that infrastructure set up? Because I think for me, I had kind of gone down a similar route to what you had, although I have not been in the industry obviously as long as you, where I was seeing some of that change happen, which is how I ended up getting you on the podcast in the first place, to just kind of talk through, like, people such as yourself, talk through what sorts of things were changing and how people were seeing the business landscape, but also these changing processes. And, now there's all these new quote unquote sustainable fabrics that are supposed to, change that landscape and use less resources and all this stuff. And it seems like now, 2 years later, there's more of a conversation around the sustainability side of things and where product comes from and where it's going. But it also seems like there's also a lot more, because of that added conversation, there's a lot more extra stuff that you have to sift through to really understand what's true and what isn't. Because there's just so much more information out there now. And to an average person, it seems like it's near impossible to really understand what's what.
Yeah, that's really true. So unpacking that a little bit, what is exciting to me is how far sustainability has gone in the apparel industry, and how many more companies who didn't have really big, strong strategies around sustainability do, and are becoming a lot more public with that information. So what I think is interesting on the social side, for a number of years, big companies have had social compliance programs. They've been auditing their factories. They've been building in sort of factory scorecards and things into their sourcing models. And we've seen a lot of changes around sourcing. So for the most part, in big companies, you're not going to see the blatant issues around child labor or non-payment of minimum wage and things like that. You're going to see sort of a baseline elevated. But you will also see it's not perfect. I'm not going to argue that everyone knows exactly what everything is made. Things get subcontracted. Some people and brands go off and source in countries they're not supposed to. And so it's a little bit of chasing stuff. But for the most part, brands have been doing a lot of baseline stuff and not talking about it. What we are starting also now to see is bigger companies moving into the space of more innovative practices related to human rights, related to environmental. So Madewell just came out with the fact that they're doing fair trade, which is really exciting, being owned by J. Crew. You'll start to see that influence probably other brands. So that's really exciting. And then on the environmental side, and when we're looking at what kind of sustainable materials there are, what I have seen again is like more and more companies have like a line of product or some product or a percentage of product, and they're etching their way in and telling a little bit more of a sustainability story. Where that gets really tricky for a consumer is you see that and you'll be like, oh, I'm like, my new favorite brand has now recycled polyester. And then you realize like it's one shirt out of all of them. And so, but it's a step forward. And I think that's the part we have to really get excited about. And then there's some brands who have just taken off, and like some of our partners, for example, prAna went from now only offers organic cotton. So as of this spring, that's the first time they've ever been able to do that. Someone like Toad & Co has now really doubled down on their commitments to sustainable materials. They won't go backwards. And so if you're starting to look for a brand where you're like, hey, I can just like buy from them and be like completely sustainable, you're starting to see more options in that space. So I think there's the momentum is right and it's moving forward. And I think there's a bit of peer pressure from brands who are saying, we got to do this because everyone else in our space is doing it. But the other big push is definitely consumers and consumers asking for it.
Yeah, and that was one of the pieces that we had just started getting into in the last episode that we did too, was it coming from the inside of these businesses or from the outside? And your answer then too was kind of the same, which was it's coming from both. And it seems like that's still, kind of on track to continue in the exact same way. Based on some of those shifts, do you see any difficulties within that system and these brands trying to create things that are more sustainable and, like you were mentioning, not slide back, as people are kind of trying to create things that are made better? Are there steps that they're taking where they're kind of having more difficulties or taking a step forward to take a half step back because of learnings that they're getting in the process? It seems like it's almost never, a fluid 1, 2, 3. It's kind of this zigzag thing.
Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, you're right. I think every brand is going to have their own journey on how they do it. I would say though, it's never been easier to start to incorporate sustainability because the supply chain is bigger and is being able to serve up to more brands the solutions that are looking for. Like 15 years ago when we started looking for organic cotton, most suppliers were like, well, we don't source that and I don't know how.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now we can go to the supply chain and say, this is what we want. And they are like, yeah, I can do that. Oh yeah, I can give you the certification. Oh yeah, I can do that. Like we're able to benefit off of all the work that's been done previously. So I think that the biggest challenge is when a brand can get the strategy from the top and say that this is a commitment, we're going to go down this path, and then those inside the brand can go forward around that. The thing you always have to watch out for is if a brand isn't truly committed and then they are like, oh, well, that didn't sell through well, or that didn't do that, we're going to scrap it. And I think that's the place where consumers can hold brands to their feet to the fire a little bit and say, like, how committed are you? And I would say customers nowadays are not just taking brands at like the first story. They're saying, let me see a proven track record of change.
Yeah, that's interesting too that you brought that up, because I think that's the difficulty that I've found myself in working for some of these brands is coming in and seeing that shift and seeing people say this is a priority, and then when it comes down to it, I think it piggybacks off of what I've talked about with a lot of other people on, which is like trying to make sure that you have more systems in place to deal with the people that you have internally and deal with those processes. Because I think, from my perspective at least, where things fall apart is when you're partway down a project and you're trying to hit a timeline and you're trying to incorporate all of these specific things that you need to be in a product and the way that you're going to market it. And then when you start to not hit deadlines and it's looking like it's not gonna cost, and you start to hit all these difficulties, that's when you're more likely to just kind of give up on it and be like, okay, well, we just need to get the product out. It doesn't necessarily have to be to this standard. And I think, yeah, back to what I was kind of how I started that thought was working for more companies within and seeing that process and seeing it kind of degrade as they get further along into some of the projects has been kind of a bummer. But I think also there's just, at least for me, there's kind of like a higher standard that I'm just not necessarily willing to let go. And so that's, obviously been a difficulty in being part of the design process, because a lot of times it's coupled with product and you're kind of the person before that whole process is taking place. And then you're not necessarily tossing it off, but moving it to someone else, and then you just kind of don't see it again. And you're like, okay, where did that go? How did it work? Like, what was my role in that process?
Yeah. Yeah. And you're identifying a really good thing that people can learn from. And that is, how do you, if we're trying to create systems change, then there has to be collective agreement and collective shared responsibility. So instead of this, like, I'm handing you off this thing, it's like, who are all the stakeholders that need to be involved inside the brand to say, okay, we're going to shepherd this through the whole process as a group and make sure that it gets through, because we all have a stake in the game to do that. Like, your marketing person would be like, well, am I selling this story? Am I not selling the story? What happened here? And production needs to know certain things and all that. So how do you then set yourselves up for success by saying, we're going to commit to this as a team and support it?
Yeah, and I think the other side of that that can be difficult too is when you get to be a part of a team that's a global team, and you're having like a copywriter, a designer, a marketer, a product developer, like all these different people touching something, that just invites more difficulties into the process, and trying to make sure that each person is seeing the project the same way, and putting the same kind of care into it. And I think that's been my difficulty from the inside, is paying attention to how this shift has kind of actually showed up within brands, and nitpicking all these little things and being like, oh man, I love this, but this one portion of this campaign is, not the way that I would have done it. And, just like seeing these little things pop up and kind of pulling from each one things that are being done in a way that I think is a little more forward thinking.
Yeah.
Back to your point where you were talking about internally working with manufacturers that have more of these standards available now. What has that been like for these companies? And I'm not sure if you're kind of as close to that world anymore, but when they're going overseas to source a lot of this stuff, it seems like those manufacturers are having to adapt to the change in like customer mindset that's occurring over here.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's really cool is that we're starting to see an alignment of what was available in the supply chain based on like trends people could tell. So for example, as we were early days, when some brands were starting to ask for things like recycled or like organic or alternative materials, the supply chain was like, I don't know, let me go look. And then you started to see these suppliers sort of appear as being leaders and being able to provide that. And then that became their shtick and their niche, and they were able to pull through. And that helps set it up for others to come through. Then at the same time, you're starting to see more of a pull from brands because they're being asked to do it because they've made commitments around sustainability, or their customers are asking for it. So then we start to feel a global pull. And I just think back to like 15 years ago, the brands in the room were like less than a dozen who were like all in committed. And now there's hundreds of companies. And what's also so cool is like so many startups are starting from the place of like, I'm only going to do fair trade and sustainable materials, and that's my baseline, and I'm going from there. And you're seeing a lot of growth in that space. So I think that pull across the customer base, both from a brand and individual perspective, is pulling through into the supply chain.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because you had talked about that a little bit on our last episode, and that being one of the kind of reasons why you had started the Renewal Workshop in the first place was because you had seen that the industry was kind of going this way, but there wasn't a lot of people that were actually going about trying to get it done. What has that been like for you to see the conversation evolve around you, and has that had kind of a direct impact on what you're doing, or has that not necessarily come full circle down the funnel yet?
It hasn't come full circle in the way that I foresee it will down the road. Right now, what is, sorry, got distracted for a second. Sorry, can you ask me that again and I'm going to answer?
Yeah. The
Good.
full circle, where you had talked about previously the fact that you had started the Renewal Workshop because there wasn't anyone really within the industry trying to focus on it, and how that conversation has changed, and if it's affected you yet.
Yeah, so it hasn't gone as full circle as I originally intended, but I foresee that it will. Like I can see that day is not too far in the future when it will be completely full circle. But right now, I would say what's exciting is that a lot of apparel brands are starting to like sustainability is becoming more strategic. It's becoming a pull through. And then companies are starting to say, oh, yeah, okay, what's the next thing? And it's like, oh, what do I do with the stuff I already made? Then we're having a conversation with companies. And we've talked to so many apparel companies about like, what are you going to do with your product at the end of its life? And we're going to provide you some solutions. But ultimately, you are going to redesign your product from the beginning so that it can actually go into a circular business model. And so that's the conversation I foresee in the future, is this like really thoughtful change to the how products are designed so that it can be really efficiently absorbed in circular. Right now, we're providing a solution for linear products and into the sort of transitional economy that will eventually get to circular. But and so what's been exciting is that when we started the Renewal Workshop 3.5 years ago, you could count on one hand who knew the word circular economy. And now there are directors of circular, there's new business models, there's like, it's blowing up in such a huge way. And I think people really like it because at the end of the day, the elephant in the room was the only way to grow our businesses is to make more stuff. And that in of itself is not sustainable.
Yeah. Well, that's really interesting too. And one of the things that I had kind of tried to start to play with my own side project was kind of starting to see that shift was happening. But I'm assuming this was kind of how you would look at the Renewal Workshop before you dove in, was that's where it's going to go, but no one's really starting that conversation yet. And so it seems like there's these kind of like conflicting things of, okay, we're going to make new products out of like recycled, like rPET kind of like bottles and stuff like that. But then at the end of the day, that's not being taken out of the ecosystem. It's going to still sit there, and it's going to take so long for that to break down. And so the next side of that is what sorts of materials can be made with that in mind before even getting into it. And that seems like that's kind of more along the lines of what you're talking about.
Right, exactly. Yeah, but the knowledge about that, I think what I find kind of obvious but frustrating but true is that people, myself included, we don't fully understand something until we're in it. So like I can understand something conceptually only if I have a filter in my brain that allowed me to put that idea into context. But if I have never done that before, which is true in circular, like true circular businesses they don't really exist out in the world yet, is that we have to help people go along on that journey. And so coming in through the Renewal Workshop, taking a brand and saying, okay, maybe today all we're going to do is take your waste and we're going to sell it as a renewed product. We're going to get it living longer. They go through that process. And then at the end, we'll say, oh, hey, here's some data about, here's all the repairs we did. Oh, here's some data about the materials that you have that we can't recycle. Here's the materials we can recycle. Here's this and this. And that information comes back through, or they're like, hey, what's the customer behavior inside of circular and renewal? And so that starts to filter in like, oh, well, wow, if we had designed it this way, then that is going to help us over here. If we did this, that's going to help us over here. So we're like, through the experience of working with us, brands are now starting to get a new world view because they have the tools to do so. And that to me, I think is what's been like a great part of how we've designed the business. But I wish we could somehow get people to experience that faster. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. We're building a mind shift.
Yeah, totally. That's a great way to put it. And I think it's interesting because it kind of comes back to what you were talking about at the beginning of our talk was the fact that it seemed like it's been so long, but also like seems like there hasn't been a whole lot, as far as movement goes since then. And I think that's kind of what you're referring to is like, you kind of start off with this grandiose vision of like, we're going to change the way that all these people do all these things. And then you come in and you get 2 years into it and you realize like, okay, we're still at the first step. We're probably going to be at the first step for a while.
Right. Right. And I mean, I will say I do take some solace in the fact that when I started in sustainability in 2004, there was like the room was pretty empty. There wasn't a lot of people. We weren't doing a lot of really innovative work. And then 2019, we're just like, it's unbelievable what sort of the flywheel of ideas and projects and things people are working on. So that will also be true for circular. So it's just like, okay, and it'll happen a lot faster too.
Yeah. So I want to kind of switch from the more global, like higher up view and kind of start to dive into things a little bit more. Because you'd mentioned there the fact that brands, as they kind of go through this process with you, come to the understanding of what materials and processes and things that they're using are affecting different things down the line. How does that process end up looking like? Take me through a product that's coming into the Renewal Workshop and what that whole process ends up looking like.
Sure. So, I'll get the product to us by saying that products right now that we receive are coming to us from the brand, and they're coming to the brand from either a customer return because it's a damaged product, or customers buy stuff, they wash it, and then they return it. But brand can't sell that as new anymore. Or it could be from a take-back program. So there's a few different ways in which this product will arrive at the Renewal Workshop. We will then, our main goal is to find the highest use of that material. And so the product is inspected and then we start the production process. So our first thing is we've got to get this product into our system. So we tag the products and then enter in some basic information about the product so that we can find out how to, like, what it is. And that's where we work with our brand partners with a lot of detail. So we need to get the product name from them, or the original price, or different information about this product so that we can help support its resale. Products are cleaned. We have a really cool cleaning technology on site here using liquid CO2.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's so it's waterless.
That's awesome.
And we can put a majority of our products through this machine. There are some that can't. The reason is that this waterless technology uses an intense amount of pressure to hold CO2 in a liquid state. And then we wash the products like that. And then at the end of that, depressurizes the chamber and then turns that CO2 from liquid to a gas. So we don't have to dry products. Yeah, it's super cool technology. And then it goes on to our repair stage of the operations. And this is where our surgeons are like replacing buttons and fixing zippers and holes and tears and like really getting the product to a like new quality. We then inspect every garment and verify its like quality level, and then get the product back out for resale. And so we have a few different resale opportunities depending on the brand. Some brands we're shipping it straight to them. They're reselling it in stores. We have our website where we'll sell products. So then I would get a photo and then get put online for sale. And the North Face, we run their website. And so we take photos and stock and get that product for resale as well.
That's awesome. So what has that been like then, working with the brands more and having to kind of pull in more like an infusion of technology, I guess I would say, because that was one thing we had talked about previously too, is the fact that it's not just the apparel side of things. You're having to kind of like get up to date on how all these back end systems work and make sure that, you know, when you're trying to resell the product that you're actually able to do so. And that's just seems like a completely different animal.
Yeah, it's been very interesting. So we have learned a lot, which has helped us leverage technology in a way. So we, for example, didn't need to build an e-commerce platform because there's great things like Shopify that are out
Mm-hmm.
there, and we can just leverage that. But there's a lot of specialty around how we connect our operations with our brand partners, with the resale of individual unique items. So that whole interconnectedness has definitely been a learning curve and journey for us as a company, and have employed some new practices and people to help manage that whole thing. One thing that I think was a big like learning curve and aha for us is how much data has become an integral part of the business. So almost as much as the product itself.
Mm-hmm.
So working with our brand partners to get access to their data, us to manipulate data in an efficient and effective way, us to leverage data in resale, all of that is something that we've had to invest a lot more in than we, I think, originally were aware of, ready for.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's so interesting though, because with some of the other guests that I've talked to, it seems like the tools side of things, like what you're using, I guess you would call it a software stack, is becoming increasingly more important, because those are the things that allow you to step away from a lot of those things that would otherwise take teams of people to be able to do. And it allows you to just kind of focus on the things that you really wanted to focus on. Obviously not to the degree that you would like, because you have to still deal with those enough to keep everything moving. But it just seems so interesting that those things are becoming such a key piece of how it all runs, because if you didn't have those, now it turns into like, who do we hire to do all of this other stuff that we just don't have the ability to get in and handle?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then what is the process like when you're getting those garments in and you're kind of sifting through each piece? Like, I'm assuming there has to be some fabrics that can't necessarily be clean in the way that you want, or they, you know, what sorts of difficulties do you run into as those products are coming in?
Yeah, so I would say the difficulty more is kind of further down the chain. Like when products come in, it's pretty straightforward. We can determine pretty quickly if it's going to be renewable or what we call recycle. So something that's really damaged or really old or like pretty trashed, we can just toss into recycle right away. For almost everything else, there's a repairability to it, or it can be a different category of product. So maybe it's not like new, maybe we've reconditioned it in some way, and maybe we can figure out different ways to sell the product. But where it gets tricky is around the recycling piece, because almost every piece of apparel was never designed for recycling. It was all designed to get sold, used, and that was it. Like no one thought about like landfill or incineration or anything. They just were like, I'm making this product because I need it to go up Everest, or it's going to go to a gala event. That's the extent of it. So what I find very interesting is how much product we have that we're sitting on that is recyclable based on today's technologies versus recyclable based on like the technologies in like 2 to 3 years from now versus 10 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
And there are just some things that are too complicated. They're made from various material types. They've got all kinds of like trims all over it, metal, plastics. Like they're these monstrous hybrids of material types. And so the efficiency to break it down and get it recycled again is going to be tricky. And that's okay, because that's a problem to solve. And it's the thing we have to figure out. But it's also kind of a small part of the business today, because what blows my mind is how much product we're sending to landfill too early.
Mm-hmm.
There is amazing, like, we would assume around 65% of everything that we get can be renewed and resold again. And that's like, and what we receive is 100% waste.
Wow. Yeah, that's insane. So how much other data that you're getting like that has kind of opened your eyes to, like the things that are kind of going on under the hood that people weren't necessarily paying attention to previously?
I think the renewability is a huge one. I think people, and it makes total sense, right? Because brands were like, I'm in the business of making and selling new things. I get something back. It's not new anymore. What are my options? And there are liquidation channels that exist, but they want new product or product in good shape. There might be jobbers that will take some product or it'll get exported overseas. So that's like, okay, that exists, but maybe I don't like it. And so I think what we are blown away by is like, okay, how much of this product is actually can get back into the market under the renewed story of it. I think the other thing that is mind blowing is how much blended materials are out there and the disconnect between what brands are making and what recyclers could actually absorb.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that we intend to provide more visibility to over time. So right now we track a lot of that, and we want to put out some better reporting to say, this is what we're collecting. And so therefore, and this is what recyclers are working on. So here are the areas that there's a disconnect with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I had only recently started kind of diving into that side of things more, like, and I'm talking within the last week or two after I had seen one of those articles about, how some different overseas programs had cut down dramatically on the amount of American waste that they were taking, and I was just like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I didn't even think about that. So it just kind of furthers your point that you were talking about earlier, which is until you've dove into it and really experienced that thing completely, you can't really fully understand where these different hang-ups are gonna come from.
Yeah, I think about that a lot about like, gosh, I know so much for better or for worse about the apparel industry. Can I even imagine what's going on in all these other industries? Like I look at like the glass, everything on my desk, right? This glass
Mm-hmm.
on my desk, like how did it get made? What was the impact? Can this be recycled? Is this a good thing or not a good thing?
Yeah.
And you just start like breaking down everything around you, and it just is like, oh wow, we need to really think differently about how we make, how we sell, how we manage the things that are made in the world in a way that's responsible and closed loop.
Totally. Yeah, because you had mentioned that in our last talk too about how you had tried to save your dishwasher from being replaced, and I thought that was funny too because it's along the exact same lines, which is looking at all these things and kind of wondering like where did that come from and where is it going to go? Especially with I've told this story probably a million times. My landlords that I had moved in with when I was in Park City, they had this massive like 50 some inch TV that they didn't want, and I was like, yeah, sure, I'll take it. Literally ended up never plugging it in once because I don't watch TV. But when I was moving and I had to get rid of it, nobody would take this thing. Like I'm looking at the local Restore furniture place. I'm looking at Best Buy. I'm looking at all these things, and there's all these stipulations of like it can't be more than 10 years old. It can't be this certain size. And I was just like, nobody, this is like the biggest piece of electronic that I have ever had in my possession, and nobody will take it. It was crazy to me.
It is crazy. It's crazy because there's no accountability back to whoever made that TV.
Mm-hmm.
They made it, just like with all the products that are out there, they've been made without thought about, oh, I have to take ownership of this for its entire life.
Yeah.
As soon as that happens, and as soon as customers hold people accountable, and or regulation comes in, we will change the way we engage with the things we make.
Yeah, so where do you see that going? Because I think lately I've had a difficult time trying to wrap my head around how there's this increase in globalism and how the like tech-centric way of doing business where the only way to make money is to scale it doesn't seem to be stopping anytime soon. And it seems like it's in direct odds with what you're trying to do in making sure that something can come full circle and be renewed, because it's right back to what we were saying with the electronics, which is like these bigger box retailers are just pumping out all this stuff, and it seems like it's going to take so much more to get those sorts of giants, behemoths, like on board with this new way of doing things.
Well, I mean, yeah, yes and no. I mean, I think as soon as consumers start to say, just like the way consumers started to say, hey, I want to know where my food comes from, I care about or the farming practices, or I want ethical manufacturing in my clothes. Like when customers started to ask those things and brands didn't have a response, they paid for it in in some way, or they invested into this transparency. So I think now as consumers start to say, I'm done with this thing and it's not my responsibility to deal with it anymore, I'm sending it back to the brand, or calling the brand and saying, what do I do with my old bike helmet? What do I do with my old climbing shoes? What do I do with my old clothes? And the brand has to respond. The other thing that I think will start to happen is just like with things that are happening, like there are some like legislative things happening in the world that are causing the whole world to change. So there is a privacy law that Europe put into place, the GDPR. And now brands are just like, forget it. I'm just going to adopt that globally across my company. That means everyone is getting upgraded to the privacy levels that Europe is, because I can't manage multiple systems. So you will see a country, or you'll probably see the EU start to change things around circular, where they will require brands to take responsibility of the things they make. And then any brand selling into Europe is going to have to respond to that. So I have a lot of faith in like that's the direction things are going, and people are starting to feel like it doesn't work for them to pay for and manage the waste a brand makes. And then the brand will be like, okay, well, we have to stop making things the same way we did, because it's too expensive for us to ship it all back to wherever to get recycled, or we're making things that don't break it down, or whatever.
Yeah, that's been interesting too, watching some of the things that the EU has been doing in regards to privacy stuff. And I've pretty much applauded every step that they've made along the way, because I was just reading the other day that they had hit Google with like billions of dollars in fines over like anti-privacy stuff that was going on over the last couple of years, that they're kind of like, trying to weasel their way out of. But yeah, it's so interesting watching that process unfold in different ways as it kind of relates to more technology related stuff, and how that plays back into the apparel space.
Yeah, because I think privacy is a really great thing. No one understood or cared about privacy until recently, when the brands have made mistakes. And so like now everyone is like looking differently at how privacy works. And so the same thing is happening with other pieces of business, where they're like, oh, wait a minute, I'm paying for the cost to dispose of somebody else's garbage. Like, why am I paying for this? And that'll evolve and move through it. So there's a lot of distrust for brands out there. And so if a brand is, I think the biggest thing, brands are trying to build trust. And so what are ways that they can do that? And having stories and taking responsibility and showing accountability is something that they have the opportunity to be a different kind of company, and they will get rewarded by the customer that way.
Yeah, I agree. I think the difficulty for me, though, is kind of seeing the scale at which that plays out in, and being frustrated at the fact that it's obviously not happening more quickly.
Yeah, sure. I mean, for us, though, it means we have to be a global company. We have to be able to offer our services in multiple areas. It means that we have to be in lockstep with the supply chain, so that when the supply chain needs recycled material, and we can move old products through. So those are the kinds of things we have to think about to support that global reach.
Yeah. Yeah. So how has that changed how you see the Renewal Workshop, a couple of years down the line compared to now, like both as it relates to, business as a whole, but also the actual product side of things, like you were mentioning, a lot of these materials that have more than one type of fabric in them that you really have, don't know what to do with yet.
Yeah. So I think for us as a company, we have to continuously evolve to support different types of brands. So we want to grow in geography, we want to grow in size, we take more product here so we can sort through it. Down the road, the recyclability of materials, that one I have a lot of optimism around. It's moved slower than I think I thought it would around the technologies, some that are in labs and some are in pilot facilities. But at some point there'll be a tipping point and there'll be a lot more of these technologies that'll be available. And then that'll allow us to work on the more complicated materials. At the same time, we can start to tell brands and get brands to start thinking ahead of like, hey, if you're making a material that's really complicated and lots of blends and spandex and things like that, there are no recycling solutions for that. So what do you want to do? And that will help innovation, and that'll help move some different decisions that brands will make around material choices.
Yeah. Yeah. So, back to like that kind of like tech forward side of things and how you're going about making sure that you're kind of up to date on all these things as they're changing around you. Like how do you end up bringing that into your awareness while you're in the middle of this whole thing without everything else going on? Because it seems like for me, it seems like there's been so much more of a science aspect to what sustainability is, mostly because of the fact that all of these materials now, when you start to scrutinize them, you're getting down to a lot of data points that you can't necessarily look at without someone that has more training into what those actually are.
It's a good question. I would say where I am now is that I've been doing this for over a decade. So I now know what questions to ask, and I know like what's sort of like, oh, what has the industry been trying to figure out and working on? So when things come through, you can look at that with a bit of an educated or an experienced eye. So for example, like when we look at like even 3 years ago when I started looking at recycling technologies out there, I had no idea about any of them. Mm-hmm. And I had the fortunate time to look into and doing a lot of research for like a year, calling up each different company, reading the details about what their science does, trying to understand like how do you break down a material, what's the difference between all the different types and chemical recycling, or breaking things down to a molecular level versus. And so now I have like a base of knowledge that I can use as a reference. And the same thing with sustainability. There's some really good work out there. Like I'm a big fan of the natural step, which is a view or a methodology for sustainability. So whenever I see a new technology or hear about something, I just run it through the natural step, and I think like, is that feasible? And you'll be like, oh yeah, it totally is, or I don't really get that. A great example of something that I continuously butt up against is this idea of bio-based plastics. Mm-hmm. And because at the end of the day, if it's still a plastic and it's behaving like a plastic just because its source was bio-based versus petrochemical based, that is a good thing for a certain set of reasons, but there's also not a good thing when we start looking at like the breakdown of plastics into our environment. And so like kind of knowing those things are out there and they exist, I know what questions to ask to see if the technology has solved the problem. And sometimes there's places where they're like, oh yeah, not only is it bio-based, but it's compostable because of this technology and the way it was built that way. Or it could be like, oh no, that's just mimicking a traditional petrochemical based plastic, and so these and these and these things are happening. So it's that balance of wanting to know the answer immediately and realizing that it does take years of experience to know like how to navigate asking those questions.
Totally. So can you explain a little bit more about that process and potentially how someone that might not be as close to this entire thing as you would go about doing that? Because I thought it was interesting that before you had mentioned that a lot of these things, like some of these changing technologies, it takes a more experienced eye or understanding to be able to scrutinize it in a way where you can come to a better understanding of whether or not it actually makes sense as kind of a next step.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of like tricks I would say for someone who doesn't want to or can't spend years getting into this. The first I look at is very simply what came out of the book Cradle to Cradle is what is the material? Where is it? Like what system does it belong in? So is it a biological material or is it a technical material? So biological is just that, right? It's anything that can be broken down and absorbed by nature again. Cotton is a great example. We grow cotton out of the earth, we make clothes, it could decompose back into the cotton. Now, I'm going to ignore the fact that we also apply a bunch of dyes and chemicals to that cotton for sake of argument here, but then you have a technical nutrient, and that means like it either came from a petrochemical source or it was a bio-based material that's been transformed enough that we've messed with the chemicals so that it doesn't actually naturally exist in nature anymore. Okay, so we've created something new. That material has to stay as a technical material. It can't go back into the earth because the earth can't absorb basically a foreign object. So then based on those two sort of ways of looking at the world, I can start to vet materials through that and say, what are the benefits of a bio-based material? What are the benefits of a petrochemical or a technical material? So that's one way to start to like get a better sense of like, what is this thing and where is it coming from and where does it go when we're done with it? The other thing to look at is what is the story that someone's telling about the material and the benefit of it. So it could be that, hey, if I use this dye, that means I have to use less water and energy because of the way this chemical is. And then you ask yourself, is that true? And so, oh yeah, traditional dyeing uses an extensive amount of water and it has to be hot water. So it's a lot of energy and there's a lot of chemicals in those dyes. And oh yeah, this technology actually really does, because of the way it's going to bond to the fiber or it's going to do something different, we're actually reducing those things. And so the question of like, is that true? Or show me how or why, helps a person figure out like, is that thing right in front of me doing some kind of environmental benefit? Now, where it gets tricky is that the supply chain for apparel is really big and long. And someone might say, hey, I have a new way of like a new input material at the front end, and that's a benefit. But then in the middle, it doesn't cause any benefit. And then at the end, it actually causes harm. And so then that's the part I think that really struggles with a consumer to say, is this better? And I think bamboo is a great example, or bamboo rayon is a fiber type that basically is a pulp that's been extruded into a yarn. For the longest time, rayon was made from trees, and it could be made from endangered trees. It could be made from like lots of different trees. And then somebody had the really smart idea to say, well, wait a minute, we could use bamboo instead of trees. Bamboo is like really fast growing, doesn't use a lot of water, doesn't use a lot of chemicals. Fantastic. It's that is a win. And that bamboo went into a process that's probably one of the most chemically harmful material processes ever to create a new fiber type. And then everyone's like, bamboo is the greenest material in the world. And you're like, yes, that's true for a part of its life. And for a part of its life, it causes a lot of harm. So the ownership of the whole story is, I think, something that people have to tell better as a brand, and then as a consumer to understand that there may be trade-offs in what we use.
That was great to hear all that, and I have a bajillion questions after that, and I hope I remember all of them. But I thought it was interesting that you brought up the cradle to cradle thing, because I had just finished that book a couple weeks ago, and I remember having the thought when I was done with it of, oh my God, this book came out before I was born. And it's only now, it seems like only now are these things starting to really catch on. And I was just like, how is this book, like like, I don't know how old it was, like almost 30 years old or something. And it seems like it's just this knowledge base sitting there that no one's pulled from.
Yeah, well, that's exciting. I mean, I always say to people, they're like, oh my God, the Renewal Workshop's so revolutionary. And it's like, no, we stole all these ideas from the 70s. Like, none of we're just living in a time where we can actually execute a lot of it. And I will say the Cradle to Cradle is one of the books that has influenced my thinking the most. It really radically shifted how I thought about materials and products. So if you haven't read it, go read Cradle to Cradle. And it's also so cool because it's not made out of paper.
Yeah. Yep. They practice what they preach. That was cool. Yeah. And it's crazy to think about all these different processes changing and how much, like I was saying, how much it's related to the science aspect of what it is, because even within a brand, like forget a consumer even attempting to try and understand this process right now, which thank you for trying, or, explaining that entire thing, because I think for me, I'm only just starting to pick up on all these pieces of it. So for me to try to explain it to other people, it just becomes this jumbled mess of brain vomit. But the science aspect of it is, it seems like it's such a core of what all of these things are, and it seems like not very many people have really done the digging to really understand that there's this whole other world underneath all of the products that they're a part of selling and designing. And it seems like we're all kind of at these last couple stages of this bigger thing going on.
Yeah, it's really true. I think when you asked a question earlier about like what's changed the most, and I think what I get the most excited about is that how many people I talk to who work inside of brands, you just are like on a call with someone who's like, I'm in production, but I care so much about sustainability. And you're like, that's amazing, because now that person's going to try and figure out how to get sustainability into their job and change the way they do things. And that upswell of people who are really passionate and want to care and have but they went into the industry not because sustainability was at the forefront. They went in because they were passionate about supply chain or graphic design, or they sort of got a job because it was, the company was nearby or whatever. And then they start to learn while they're in it. And then as they learn, their minds are blown, and then they're also part of creating and enabling the solutions.
Yeah, totally. Well, it's also funny to think about the fact that, at least on my end of things, the marketing side of things was and has been, and I think will be, such a huge part of how these brands market themselves, because the story has to be able to differentiate themselves from other people and who they are and what their core beliefs are. And now that that's becoming such a forefront, people are starting to really look into what those messages are and say, is this BS, or how far does this go? And then I think pretty quickly you can realize, just based on the fact that content has become such a huge focus, how deep those kind of like through pieces of a business run when you're starting to look at, what I was saying earlier, copywriting, designing, all these different pieces of the business. And I think people now more than ever are expert BS sniffers. And as we get more into like the sustainability side of things, I think it's just going to keep pushing that way.
I agree.
Cool. Awesome. I'm trying to think of what else what other questions I had out of that that whole little piece. Oh, here's a one-off one. You had talked about your systems that you use to clean the garments when you get them in. How does so if that doesn't use water, what is the waste like for that? After, like, the things that it's pulling off of. I don't know how to.
Yeah, I totally follow you. So basically what's kind of interesting is, so imagine CO2 has gone into this chamber, looks like a great big washing machine. It looks like your washing machine at home. It doesn't, but it does. So it's a liquid state, and there's a detergent in there. And so the detergent is aggravating the fabrics and pulling the dirts and the oils off the product. And then that liquid gets purged through into like tubes to get, like, that would go out of the machine. But at that point, basically what happens is the CO2 turns back to a gas, it goes up, and then all the like particulate matter falls down.
That is so cool.
And then we just collect that particulate matter. And so most of it is dirt, dyes, and old detergent. So it's actually just a tub of like dirty soap.
Funk, a tub of funk.
Yeah.
So that brings me into another question, which is, I know there's been a lot of talk about the microfiber stuff going on within the apparel space. What are your thoughts around that whole thing, and how does that machine that you have offer any sort of insight into what the future could be like in terms of either what apparel is made of or how it's actually cleaned?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So our machine is the size of like a bedroom. That's like, it's not small, so it's not, and it's also very expensive. So you're not going to see one of these in everybody's homes. The great thing is, it is true, we capture all of the effluent out of the machine, and so none of that's going into wastewater treatment and therefore not going out into the environment like microplastics are in our homes. So while we're offering a fantastic service while it's here, as soon as someone buys something and then goes home and washes in their laundry, we're back to where we're back to with everything else. I think what's tricky is that ultimately one day maybe there'll be this technology will become in a place where it can go into everybody's homes and people can use it. What I think is also kind of heartbreaking around this microplastics issue is that we're just at the beginning of understanding how severe of a problem it is and where the big problems are. So some of the research that's happening is people are trying to decide, like, is our home washing the biggest culprit, or are we seeing this problem happening at the supply chain level, at the dye house, at the factory level? If it is happening in our homes, then the easiest thing that I think we're going to be able to do is figure out how to build filters in our washing machine so that we just don't release any of that. At the same time, brands are definitely looking at how do they develop better fabrics that don't shed any microplastics. So it'll be a multi-solutioned thing that we're sort of, unfortunately, we're still early stages of learning the whole issues. And then when we learn all the issues, we're going to be having solutions happening at the same time. And it gets tricky. All of that needs to happen and is happening. And there's some amazing, smart people working on that. I think everyone's sort of fingers would love that to be a silver bullet solution, but I don't think that that's what we're going to see.
Yeah. It's the only thought that I could think of when that kind of popped into my head was the fact that it seems like a parallel between personal computing, like how computers used to be the size of a room and then they became these tiny little things. Like, I wonder if that side of washing will ever change kind of how people are doing that within their homes. It's kind of an interesting thought. But back to the kind of the science portion of things, had that been something that you were as aware of as you were working in the industry more? And what was it like kind of coming to the realization that is an underlying thing with all of these different apparel brands is like the fiber content and what it's made of and does it degrade, and all these things that are just so much more technical than they appear to be on the surface.
Yeah, no, we had no idea. I mean, I think that like it took a report coming out saying, "Hey, by the way, there's all this like one, there's all this plastic in the oceans. Two, there's all this microplastic in the oceans that are like at the level of fiber." And then when you take that step back and you think about it, and you're like, "Oh my God, like look at all the lint I pull out of my dryer. There's the equivalent going out of my washing machine into the world." And then what we know about bioaccumulation on plastics, it's just gets, I'm sitting here actually playing with a piece of plastic in my hair. It's from my vitamin bottle. I don't know why it's here, but it just is like, yeah, this thing is like, this is the problem. It was never designed to be out in nature. It's not going to be absorbed by nature.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, the fact that we let it release into nature, what else were we expecting? So this is the difference between the biological and the technical nutrients. We need a way to take all technical nutrients and capture them and keep them in a closed loop system, because nature is like, we can't, there's no more, we've polluted it too far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. It also had to have been crazy seeing that entire fire happen around you. Like however long ago that was, that like a year ago or so at this point? Like
a year and a half ago, yeah.
Yeah. While you're trying to work to solve all these different issues within the environment, all of a sudden the hills around you go up in flames.
Yeah, it is. It was very ironic, but heartbreaking, and a huge reminder of like the macro level of what's happening to our world right now. So just as some context, we had a massive forest fire outside of our factory. We were in a what's called a national scenic area, and so there's a ton of forest behind us. Our factory was in a evacuation zone. It was a level 2, which meant be ready to go as soon as we say go.
Wow.
And 3 days into the fire, or the first night into the fire, we came in and we pulled out everything of like the computers and like all the important files. And then the next day we came back and pulled out all of the inventory in the factory and basically ran our e-commerce site out of the back of a U-Haul truck.
Whoa.
Which was insane. Then I went to my garage. But after a few days, our employees were like, well, I need to go to work. Like, I can't afford to not be working. And so we just every morning would meet and say, just as a reminder, you're in an evacuation zone. At any second, someone could say, get out of here. We will drop everything we do. Everyone's in the car. We have a safety plan to get everyone out of here. And are you sure you want to come to work? And
yeah, no kidding.
And everyone was like, yeah, what else am I going to do? Which was kind of hilarious. So we would sit here at lunch and we would literally watch the hillside behind our factory burn and be like, the carbon that is being released into the air and what we're trying to save is just like, it was just heartbreaking to think like climate change is causing our world on a macro level, and here we are trying to do business a little bit different, and it's not happening fast enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's absolutely insane. So was everything fine? Did you guys squeak away from it?
We were very, very lucky. We were very, very lucky. I remember there was a moment, it was in September, and usually it had been a very obviously dry summer. And I was at one of these town hall meetings where people were talking, and the guy from NOAA stands up and he's like, the good news is in 2 days from now, it's going to pour rain. And that's what Oregon does best. It just rains here. And we were so lucky that literally if this had like kept burning, or there was more wind, whatever, it could have just gone in so many different directions. But we had a storm coming, and they predicted that thing on the minute, and sky opened, dumped rain, and we were able to slow the fire down.
That's insanity.
It is so insane. Because then you look at California, which is like, I'm like, oh God, you guys aren't going to get rain for months. How is
Yeah,
this going to change? Anyway, this
yeah.
big sidebar there.
Well, I'm glad everything was okay and you didn't have to deal with any potential, year-long setback of having to hit the restart button on everything.
No, but we now have we have a policy in our company around weather. We actually have because employees want to know what happens if the factory's closed due to weather, and how do they get paid and what's their livelihood alike. So when we talk about how does climate change affect you on a daily basis, like I can point to the fact that we have had to change our business to adapt to climate change. We have a policy around it. So ever in the last 2 winters, we've had these massive freak snowstorms, which cause roads to close, which cause us people to actually not get to work. And then people are like, well, how do I, like, we're a factory. We don't have the luxury of working from home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's crazy to think about how there's all of these. You kind of have to go through these rungs of how businesses are built in order to get to a point where you're really pushing the envelope on these systems and how you can do better. But that fire is and all these other kind of natural things that are going on around you are such crazy reminders of the fact that when those things happen, it all comes back to square one. It's like people need to be able to pay for things for their family. They need to be able to survive. And, how quickly that can go from we're trying to solve this thing higher up here to just this base level, like how do we get food? How do we provide for the people that we love? And, it's this nuts juxtaposition of how quickly those things can change.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So what other things have you learned in the last 2 years? What things have popped out as being something that you may not have thought about, or what things may not have been as important as you thought they would be? Like what, looking back, what seems different?
Whew, that's a good one. I think I think my I think my biggest learning that I'm experiencing right now is how obvious this all seems to me around this need to shift towards circular business models and to get out of this linear uh, rat race and really start to think about how we're going to build our businesses for the future in both like in sales, in finance, and accounting, in like data and systems, like that whole transition and shift that's going to occur is going to be very much akin to like what we experienced when we went from not selling things to selling things in online, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when we moved into this digital world and you look at how we do accounting, how we sell things, how we have systems in place and like the technology lift, we all sit at computers and do our jobs. Like that transformation is what will happen in circular. And to me, it feels just like so obvious and there's so much urgency and there's so much opportunity. And then I'll sit down and have conversations with brands who are like, well, we need to be able to see the return on
Mm-hmm.
investment
Same
before we
conversation.
same conversation. And I get it because that's how we've all been programmed to make decisions. And so when we look at our ability to adapt and to make decisions in the future, it will require a new type of thinking, a new type of leadership, a new type of action. And that that is going to take a little while to make that be it's a new muscle we're building inside of businesses. And so now I realize like, oh, my job is to start training people on this new muscle and providing them more information and explaining it in a different way and supporting that transition because I'm running ahead by myself, and that's not getting anything done. I need to be bringing everyone along, and so that's now a refocus of like where I need to spend my time and attention.
Yeah. So what does that end up looking like then? Are there a few key things that you're kind of looking at as being the next step? So I'm assuming, obviously, like you were mentioning, the bringing more brands on board with showing them what the actual life cycle of their product is kind of step one. What are the next couple after that?
Yeah. So getting some more visibility into their products and operations, that's the biggest one. Like when we can sit down with a brand and actually spend the time to go through their operations and show them this is what much it's costing you today, here's what the potential market is for this product, here's the potential sales opportunity, that kind of thing. So that has a whole plan and purpose around it. The other thing that I'm really recently very excited about is this idea of relevancy. And so how does a brand stay relevant when there's a consumer base that's shifting towards sustainability, towards doing the right thing, towards zero waste, all of that? And if you are a brand who is not serving that customer, how do you stay relevant? And providing that that data so that a brand can make that decision. Because what's happening is we are shifting the consumer base, right? So our baby boomers are getting so much older, and then Gen X, which is funny because I'm a Gen X and I feel like we're the irrelevant generation. It's all baby boomers and millennials. And it's like, what about the mess in the middle? But the getting ready for the millennial consumer who is now starting to age into their early to mid 30s and is bringing a buying power behind it. What does that mean? And so getting brands excited about that and ready for that is my new focus.
Yeah. Yeah, that's super interesting. What are there any other kind of pieces along those lines that you've seen in terms of either, a shift in the landscape or where you see certain things going that maybe other people might not necessarily have seen?
Well, I definitely think that if you are a company who makes things and you have not considered what your business looks like in a circular business model, you need to. And so what that is looking like, and you see it, my favorite example is like Ford Motor Company now is transitioning to be a mobility company. Mm-hmm. So they're saying, hey, we do not see single-use ownership of cars is the future. We're seeing like non-driverless cars, we're seeing sharing of cars, we're seeing like mass transportation, we're seeing all of these things appearing as these macro trends. And so how do we stay relevant and stay in business? We're seeing in apparel, we see renting and subscription and leasing of clothing starting to go up in a way that has never happened before. So all of a sudden is there a potential sharing economy inside of apparel? Looking at that, the other real thing is like getting a sense of what are the use cases of how we interact with things. So and also being smart about it. I think I look at my home and I would share everything. I don't want to own anything. Like that is my model. And then I have my husband who would never share a thing with anybody else. He wants to own his own chainsaw. He could share it to his two friends, but that's like it. Mm-hmm. So that kind of like being clear about the use case and being able to provide multiple business models for that use case, but knowing that the traditional model of selling more things is not going to be there in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. And it's interesting because you can kind of start to see these shifts like that happening, but it's always the other side of that is how it actually starts to play out, because as you get further along into it, you see all these different things pop up and it kind of like shifts in a way that you didn't necessarily see coming, but in a way that you did at the same time. There's these little nuances that, kind of change the dynamic of what's happening, which is why I was also interested in having you on again, because it seemed like, as I had kind of started to talk off, there was so many things that seemed so relevant, but so many things that also seemed uh, like they had changed.
Yeah.
So, yep, go ahead.
Oh,
That's it.
I think that I think about that a lot. Like, one of the early questions we started the company was people said, is anyone going to want to buy someone's used clothes?
Mhm.
And I think that like now that we never get asked that question, like
Yeah,
never.
and,
It's
and it's only
like,
been 2 years.
yeah. So
Interesting. So if someone were to either, whether they're trying to start a brand now or they have been working within a larger brand, are there areas that you would point people to kind of learn more about the things that they're putting out into the world, and get more of an understanding for the cradle to cradle circular economy kind of mindset?
yeah, so definitely. So a few things. One is read Cradle to Cradle. The other great resource is the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. So they're based out of the UK, and they focus on a global circular economy. They've done some good work on plastics, and they've done some really good work on textiles. So getting a sense of, they also do a lot of analysis on different business model types. So that's been very, very good. The other for apparel, the another really great resource is the Textile Exchange. So they do a lot of really good material reports and focus. I mean, textile focused, but they provide really great guidance for companies who are interested in becoming more sustainable and what are the resources and things to do there. Um, and yeah, that those are some really great ones that I would think are broad enough that would speak to a lot of different types of businesses and stages.
Awesome. What about an average consumer? If someone's, trying to vet these brands that they potentially have had a longer relationship with, or they're looking into some new stuff, how can they go about trying to put some of those products or brands through a filter?
Yeah. Um, I there's a really good site called Remade. No, Remake. Uh Remake, and they do some vetting for brand about brands, and try and sort of educate. There's an organization here in Portland called the Sustainable Fashion Forum, who's also doing a lot of really good work to help people think about like what questions to ask and how to figure that out. But as a consumer, the big bucket areas is like, what is it made out of? So what are the materials? Then the next is like, what are the human rights of the people who made that product? And then now what we would add is, where does it go when the brand is done with it? And so if a brand does not have a response to that yet, that's a great place to push them a little bit. You can send them
Awesome.
our way.
I will definitely send them your way. And that's the perfect segment into how can people find what you're up to.
Yes. So we are pretty active on Instagram and Facebook with at Renewal Workshop. And you can definitely, I would say the best place to get access to really great info is to sign up for our newsletter. So you can do that via our website. We don't send out a lot of newsletters. We focus really about content and about enabling all of our followers and people in our ecosystem to act. And so we want to get you information so that you can do the right thing. And we are
Awesome.
at renewalworkshop.com.
Cool. And then is there any little teasers that you can give people in regards to potential things that are coming out or new on the horizon?
Yes, I can. I'm trying to think how to word this. Um, we will, this late spring, early summer, be launching more product types. So we have been focused on apparel. We've done a little bit of home goods, but you're going to start to see bags come out of the Renewal Workshop, which is very
Awesome.
exciting.
Hot commodity.
Yeah.
The everyday carry scene. Yeah, that's going to be another one that's going to start to get bigger here soon too.
Hmm. Hmm.
Awesome. Great to hear it. Well, it was a pleasure, and I think we're gonna have to do another one of these sooner than the next 2 years.
That sounds great. Thank you, Nick. You always ask really good questions, and I enjoy talking with you.
Yeah, right back at you, and I appreciate your answers. I think a lot of people kind of have difficulty going in depth with a lot of this stuff because it's just there's so many moving pieces to all of it, and it's constantly changing. So it's
Yeah.
cool to talk with someone that's as down to earth as you are, and is in the middle of just this whirlwind of all this stuff.
Thanks.
Awesome. Well, sweet. Have a great rest of your night, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Sounds good.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.